Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this A2A mini webinar hosted by the European Patient Safety Foundation. For those who don't know me, my name is Vilka Shikelova, and I'm the General Secretary of the EUPSF, and I will be moderating today's session. Let me begin by thanking you, our affiliates, and members of our affiliated organizations for joining us today, and a special thank you to our guest speaker, Professor Kirsty Freeman, who I will introduce in just a moment. We created this A2A webinar series because we believe that a lot of knowledge, experience, and innovative practices exist within our network and among our affiliates. By sharing it with each other, we can save time, avoid duplication, and most importantly, accelerate change in the field of patient safety. These webinars also provide a space to build stronger connections across our community, between our annual conferences and around specific topics. Today's session is organized in collaboration with our newly joined affiliate, the Society for Simulation in Europe, SESAM. And the focus is, of course, on simulation, a powerful tool to improve patient safety, whether through training healthcare teams, strengthening communication and teamwork, or testing new processes before they affect real patients. This presentation is also kind of introduction or a teaser for the session we are preparing together with SESAM at our upcoming European Patient Safety Conference taking place on 24th of October in Munich. There, we will continue today's discussion in an interactive format and bring together simulation experts from Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, and the UK, who will share practical examples of projects and initiatives in the field. Together, we will explore both the opportunities and the challenges of making simulation an integrated part of everyday patient safety efforts. So let me introduce you now our speaker. Professor Kirsty Freeman is an associate professor at the Rural Clinical School of Western Australia and secretary of the SESAM board. She has extensive international expertise in healthcare simulation and patient safety, with a strong focus on translating research into practical applications, addressing implementation barriers, and building effective partnerships. Through her leadership at SESAM, she champions communities of practice which bring together the exchange knowledge and develop strategies that turn collective expertise into meaningful change for patients. And before we begin, just a few housekeeping points. You are welcome to ask questions during the presentation using the chat function. I will keep an eye on them and bring them forward after the presentation to support a smooth discussion. Please know that the presentation will be recorded so we can share it with a wider audience, as this topic extends well beyond our foundation and will be of interest to many others working in healthcare and patient safety. The open discussion that will follow the presentation will not be recorded. That part of the webinar is meant to be safe, closed space for our affiliates to exchange, reflect, and connect more personally as a community. The full session will last around 1 hour. So thank you again for being with us today, and I hope you will enjoy this moment. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Kirsty Freeman, who will guide us through today's webinar on from innovation to implementation, how SESAM is advancing patient safety through simulation. Professor Freeman, the floor is yours.
How spectacular, that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I will just make sure I move you all so I can see you on my screens today. Mirka and everyone, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's been such a privilege to be invited to have a chat with you. So as Mirka mentioned, my name is Kirsty Freeman, and I, like her, am the secretary of an incredible organisation, SESAM, Society for Simulation in Europe. And as Mirka mentioned, I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about how SESAM is advancing patient safety through simulation. But before I get into the presentation, I thought I might share a little bit about how I discovered the transformative power of simulation. About 30 years ago, I trained as a nurse and then later a midwife with a real passion for educating, and here I am many, many decades later. I spent a lot of time in my early clinical years working with families to prepare them for the arrival of their brand new baby. And whilst we didn't call it simulation back then, I used to run a teaching session with expected parents, helping them try to understand and prepare for all the different birth experiences they may experience as they brought their baby into the world. But one particular simulation that I developed focused on cesarean births. Not much equipment was involved. It was a pretty simple affair. But as I watched couples who had experienced this simulation session, they responded so differently when they actually needed an emergency cesarean section. Instead of that fear and confusion, they had understanding. Instead of a feeling of powerlessness, I saw them and they shared that they felt prepared and in control. Simulation had given them knowledge, confidence, and most importantly for me, a sense of agency in that critical moment in their healthcare journey. So this led to me exploring other potential opportunities to use simulation in other healthcare contexts. Today, I work extensively in rural and remote Western Australia, using simulation to train both healthcare teams in very small environments, but also the future healthcare professionals. In these settings, where often our resources are really limited, teams have to work really closely together in a seamless fashion. And what we find is that simulation becomes even more critical. Often it's the only way to actually provide safe practice of a variety of clinical scenarios before these clinicians and non-clinicians as part of our healthcare team experience them in real life. So these experiences, from empowering those expected parents to training rural healthcare teams, really exemplifies what SESAM represents. We are the Society for Simulation in Europe, and we are proud to actually be the oldest simulation society. Our story began in about 1984, that's over 30 years ago now, with a very small group of visionary clinicians who met in a cozy little restaurant in Copenhagen. And over a dinner, and what I'm sure was probably a couple of drinks, they dreamed of creating a European group for simulation specifically within the healthcare space. They called themselves SESAM. They wrote it down on a bit of paper that evening. And SESAM back then stood for Simulation in Europe for Anaesthesia and Medicine. And over the decades, we've broadened our scope to be more than just anaesthesia and medicine, to now include all professionals and non-healthcare professionals, patients and their families. So from those humble beginnings in that restaurant, SESAM has grown into a leading international society within the healthcare simulation space. And whilst our name reflects our European foundations, our reach is truly global, with members across 6 continents, united by this commitment to use simulation to create safer, more equitable healthcare experiences. So whilst we started as an informal group of colleagues, we have become a real formal society that was officially constituted over 30 years ago, making us not just the oldest, but one of the most established voices of healthcare simulation globally. And this is precisely why SESAM has affiliated with the European Patient Safety Foundation, because it just makes so much sense in terms of our strategic focus. I think that we, all of us here today, and those that have the privilege of listening after, really share this fundamental commitment to evidence-based patient safety, rooted in our understanding that prepared, empowered healthcare providers, whether they be in urban centres or remote communities, create safer outcomes for all our patients. So I don't want to assume that we're all on the same page when we're talking about what simulation is. So for those who are new to healthcare simulation, I thought maybe I just would explain a little bit about what I mean. Most people do understand simulation through other familiar examples, such as we know that pilots tend to learn to fly in a cockpit simulator before they ever take us up in the air in an aircraft for the first time. Some of you yourself may have experienced simulation, maybe doing a first aid course, learning to do CPR through those half-bodied mannequins that you can often see. Healthcare simulation, well, it applies the same principles that some of those other industries do. We replicate real-world healthcare interactions in safe, controlled environments using everything from full-bodied mannequins to simulated participants, sometimes referred to as actors, to computer-based activities, and now virtual and mixed reality. But I think most importantly, Simulation is never about the technology. It's always about the outcome. So I thought I might share a really powerful example. Many of you might have seen this picture on the screen, which is a famous image of passengers standing on the wing of an aircraft that landed on the Hudson River. Believe it or not, that was back now in 2009. So just have a look for a moment. What many people don't notice when they look at this picture is the lack of life jackets. Now, many of us have the privilege of going on an aeroplane, and I'm sure you pay diligent attention to that safety briefing that the crew give. And what we can see here is, despite clear safety briefing telling the passengers what to do, we can see by this image, most of those people did not actually retrieve their life jacket during that emergency. I think this illustrates a crucial difference between knowing what to do and being able to do something under pressure. So whilst those airline safety briefings tell us the procedures, in simulation, that is actually practicing, that sort of creates that muscle memory and that confidence that's needed in those crisis situations. In healthcare, we know the difference can really be life or death. So the fundamental principle in simulation is that we create opportunities for all the members of the healthcare workforce to practice, to sometimes have the privilege of making a mistake, learning from it and improving, and doing all of this in a really safe environment where no real patient can be harmed. It was been really interesting watching, having worked in the simulation industry now for several decades. We can now see some real robust evidence that really reinforces what I witnessed in those early cesarean section simulation days, and I can continue to see in my rural simulation practice. What we know from recent research, that simulation training significantly reduces mortality rates. We know that research shows simulation training reduces procedural errors, sometimes by up to 60%. This isn't just theory, these are actual measurable patient safety impacts. The evidence for simulation impact on patient safety is continuing to grow. We know that recent research also shows that just-in-time simulation, that is where a team will come together immediately before performing a procedure to simulate it, that really improves significantly the performance outcomes. So simulation addresses both technical and behavioural skills. So while healthcare professionals learn the procedures and the protocols, they also develop, as we all know, those crucial communication skills, that ability to work in a team, that leadership and followership under pressure, and decision-making in really complex situations. And these behavioural skills, once again, are often the difference between good patient outcomes and adverse events. But I think there's another crucial dimension, and that is clinician safety and wellbeing. And I think this is one of the biggest threats at the moment to patient safety, is the actual unsafe clinician, or even that burnt out clinician. Those that are stressed and anxious or feeling underprepared for a certain clinical situation. So whilst healthcare professionals are in short supply worldwide, we really need to look after those that we have, and simulation is being shown to be a way in which we can do that. Because some systematic reviews that have been published really show that simulation interventions can improve both individual and team performance in these critical events, and that it can reduce clinicians' stress and anxiety, particularly in some recent data around emergency medicine physicians, showing a physiological benefit when they look at their heart rate variability following simulation-based education. And what we know is that research is showing us that learner engagement in simulation is actually correlated with significant improvement in wellbeing. And as I said, if we're really struggling to keep our workforce, we need to keep them well, and clinician safety and clinician wellbeing is a really important component. So if we can have clinicians who feel well prepared, confident, supported, our patients are safer. And so I think this is where the simulation creates a powerful cycle, providing safe environment to practice some of these high stakes scenarios, or just actually some of the everyday stuff that we need to do. It can build resilience, hopefully reduce that burnout, and create a sustainable healthcare workforce that can consistently deliver increased patient safety outcomes. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about, well, how is simulation implemented out there? There are a lot of different approaches that I don't have time to go into today, but if you happen to be in Munich in October, we can go into more detail. But you might find that in situ simulation is one way that can bring training directly to that clinical area, allowing teams to actually practice in their real working environment. So that's what we mean by in situ. Often requires a spare bed that is not taken by a patient for this to happen. But it can have real powerful impacts in getting the team to work in their actual clinical environment. And we know that people report that one of the outcomes for this as well is identifying system issues, policy issues, physical layout of the space. So in situ simulation has many aspects that can be beneficial. I already touched on just-in-time training. This is where we're providing immediate simulation-based experiences right before what is often a high-risk procedure. And the other aspect that I love and work particularly in these small environments in which I train is interprofessional simulation. We do this mostly because in some of our rural and remote environments, we're working with very small healthcare teams. There might only be a doctor, a nurse, and other untrained members of the healthcare team. And so simulation can provide those teams, both large and small, the ability to work seamlessly together. But what we know is that effective simulation programs have some common characteristics. What makes them effective is they're actually integrated into regular clinical practice, which can be interesting around the world about how these things are funded. We know that they are proven to be effective when they are supported by organisational leadership. So that's one of the things that we really need to focus on when we look at advocating for simulation, and that is advocating from the top down. Simulation can only be effective. It really includes a robust debriefing and reflective component so that people can reflect on the experience and make sure that they actually take that back into their clinical environment. It's measuring both learning outcomes and patient safety metrics. And we know that these programs, really importantly, can only be effective if they are adapted to the local context and the local challenge. For example, what works for me in rural Western Australia might work where you are. So it needs to be adapted to your own particular context. So this brings us to one of healthcare's most persistent challenges. How do we translate research into practice? How do we ensure that those evidence-based innovations like simulation actually improve patient safety and patient care at the bedside? And I think this is where SESAM, as an organisation, has taken a really comprehensive approach about how we do this. And so I thought I might just share some of the mechanisms that we find are really effective. So the first is through our annual Congress. Many societies do this, and we find that at our international Congress this year in June, we were really fortunate. Mirka was one of our speakers, and to nearly 1,500 delegates gathered over a 3-day period from all parts around the world to get to learn with, from, and about one another. And so those opportunities to actually come together face-to-face or virtual, if that's the only option, can be really important. And speaking of those virtual opportunities, one of the things that we find, because we are such a geographically dispersed society, those virtual opportunities to come together. So we have, to complement our face-to-face annual Congress, we really find the importance of webinars like this, but we run what we call SAVE, our CSAM annual virtual event. And this year, in March, we actually focused on simulation that was being delivered in low-resource communities around the world. So places on the African continent, the Indian continent, were really interesting to learn from those colleagues around how they're getting incredible outcomes by some really challenging conditions. And one of the other things that we find really important is publishing and disseminating work in journals. So we're really excited that we have our cutting edge research published in Advances in Simulation, which is CSAM's official journal, and really excited that just recently the impact factor of that has gone up to 4.7. So it means our researchers and academics who share their work are getting really great dissemination through that. But it's more than just these type of events. It's coming together with affiliates such as yourself on these small, intimate webinars that we have, that opportunity just to speak casually with one another. So we have platforms and engage with affiliates such as the European Patient Safety Foundation to share resources. We look at accrediting facilities and disseminating standards. It's really about fostering partnerships between organisations such as ourselves so that we can spread across institutions, across borders. And so I think each of these mechanisms that we tap into serves a different aspect of how we can achieve knowledge translation. It would be wrong of me not to plug, therefore, our next annual meeting. And so once again, we're in the process of planning our 2026 meeting, which will be in Lyon in France in June. And this is really going to focus on the diversity of what we do in healthcare simulation. And we have a very rigorous scientific program, which we're currently accepting abstracts for at the moment. But I wanted to pick on something that Mirka mentioned when she introduced me today, and it's this concept of community of practice, which is why SESAM have come together to affiliate with the European Patient Safety Foundation. We think it's a really particularly powerful mechanism in which to engage, building these networks of professionals who share experiences and we learn from one another. These communities really bring not just clinicians, educators and researchers together, but also some of the specialty areas, whether it be obstetrics and midwifery, emergency medicine, and interprofessional education. But as I said, also some of those professionals that are not clinical, whether they be engineers, etc. So we like to provide a platform for them as well. So within SESAM, as much as we have a broad membership, and you can see many of the smiling faces on the screen here, it is about slowly building those smaller communities of practice so that we can specialise in certain areas, but giving access to a broader aspect as well so we can learn from one another and apply things in different natures. But this ability to chat, collaborate, like you can see here, is really important to us. And we find that these create structure, trusted environments where all of our members can really share the challenges that we're experiencing, but also the innovations and the solutions that we've all uniquely come up with in our environments. One of the other things I wanted to really share was around global advocacy and international reach. So what is particularly powerful in SESAM is our global reach, and I think our unique ability to advocate on an international level. So unlike other simulation societies that are country specific, we can speak with one voice across all borders and healthcare systems. So as a simulation innovation is developed in one country, we can rapidly share that and it can be adapted and implemented worldwide. And I think, for example, we certainly saw simulation scenarios for managing COVID patients, for preparing staff. As they were developed in one country, we had the ability to share, test across our incredible network. And within weeks, they'll be able to be implemented as the pandemic was evolving. So I think our international perspective allows us to advocate globally for simulation's role within patient safety. Working on initiatives in 2004, we worked with some other affiliate programs to actually publish the first global consensus statement on simulation-based practice in healthcare. And engaging with international bodies to ensure that simulation is recognised as an essential patient safety intervention across all healthcare systems, regardless of geography or resources. And I think as a society, we believe in actively sort of contributing to the evidence base and leverage our unique international position to advocate for that. So we have the ability, therefore, support researchers in country, out of country, across continents, to really build some multi-site studies, because we think that's really important, but also then when they have results to disseminate them. And whilst we ourselves may not come up with certain standards specific to areas of simulation, what we're proud of is actually disseminating the work of others. And that's why we collaborate with people like the European Patient Safety Foundation. One of the other things that I think is really important to us is to see how we can partner with organisations, because whilst we have simulation expertise, we need to tap into others to make sure that we can translate this through other mechanisms. So as Monica mentioned, we're really excited of coming together when we meet in Munich in October to really take a deeper dive in terms of what people are actually doing in terms of advocating for developing policy, developing systems, developing our healthcare workforce. Bringing the consumer on that journey is really important. And we think that together we can do that. So I think what I want us to get out of our conversation today is probably 3 main take-home messages. And for me, that's very much around understanding that healthcare simulation is not just an education tool. It really does have the evidence to show that it is a proven patient safety intervention with robust evidence, as I mentioned, to show that we can reduce mortality, we can reduce errors, and we can improve clinical outcomes and increase patient safety and clinician safety. Secondly, I think its effective knowledge translation requires multiple approaches, and part of that can really only be achieved through collaboration. So whether that be through joint collaboratives such as webinars like this, making sure that we have the ability to put on international conferences like the event in Munich, like the event in Lyon next year, because that gives the ability for different minds to come together. And that brings out potential research collaborations, building professional networks. The third one for me is really collaboration amplifies impact. And I think SESAM's expertise in simulation and knowledge translation, combined with our affiliates such as the European Patient Safety Foundation, who have leadership and advocacy and reach in the space, really does create an opportunity for systemic change that neither organisation could necessarily achieve on their own. So my title for today was From Innovation to Implementation. And whilst we only have a little time to talk, I really want to stress that that journey really requires all of us. It requires researchers to develop evidence-based interventions. It requires educators like you and me to translate them into effective practice. It needs those clinicians to implement them in practice. And it needs advocates to ensure that we can reach patients who need them the most. So each of you, as affiliates, play a crucial role in this journey. So I hope that you can join us in Munich and join us for a deeper dive, engage in our communities of practice with SESAM, or simply take some ideas into your own organisation. But most importantly, what I want to remind people about is that people are already doing incredible things in their organisation, and we want to provide a platform for them to disseminate them so that you can contribute to the global movement towards a safer healthcare through simulation and collaboration. So I want to thank you for having a bit of a listen to my chat today. I don't know if you have any particular questions or comments, but we have an incredible network on social media, on LinkedIn. And so I just encourage you to connect to the people around you. Build your own community within your own organisation, but don't forget to look further afield, whether that be in the organisation next door, the organisation outside your country, or once again, an organisation on the other side of the world, as I come to you from Western Australia today. Thanks so much for listening.